What we focused on since we've done our last webinar is capabilities in the software to really improve the quality of data that's being captured through the application. Because as we've talked, the idea is that you can really use this as a supplement to the daily log reporting. Having more accurate information being captured just reduces the amount of things like people miskeying in company name, having 5 versions of the same contractor. You've got to figure out what's going on there. I think you also had cases of when visitors were checking in, you had just people putting in their first name. So you have 10 Joes in the log you're looking at, and you really couldn't actually tell who that person was. So we put things in there like full name validation, the ability to have even more contact information. I think in your case, you were saying it was set up so they could put an address in, but were they really putting in just their street address, their city, their state postal code for contact tracing? And the system is totally customizable. So you decide how much of this information you really want to capture beyond, the basic, the name, the phone number, the email type of thing. And then the other big thing was actually the ability for you to put in, for example, a list of all your subcontractors into our system. So when the visitor checks in, they're no longer typing in the name of the company, and perhaps you got 10 different versions of the same name of the subcontractor. And now they can actually pick from a list that you provide. The end result is actually can check in quicker, and it makes the reporting through our system, much more accurate. You're only looking at one version of a name of a subcontractor. They're not trying to piece together 5 or 10 different versions of that name, right?
Yeah, that's been probably one of the most helpful upgrades that you've done for us. And when I look at it every other day, if there's a sub that I missed, I just go add them to the list. It's pretty easy. Then it makes it better for when the people are checking in.
Yeah, the other thing we've done, I can't recall if you're taking advantage of this quite yet, is we do have cases where, as you had mentioned earlier, when people check in, they actually go through the questions too quickly, and perhaps they're not paying attention to whether they're answering yes or no, and they're told they're denied access to the site. And so in our application, our customers have different processes for dealing when somebody's told they're denied access. Usually it'll come down to somebody asking that person, what's going on? You answer the question in a way that's a problem. We don't store any of their health information in our system, right? We just don't want to deal with any HIPAA issues. Typically the supervisor, safety officer at the site will ask, what's going on? In some cases, the visitor will say, gee, I actually didn't mean to answer the question that way. And the process then is typically 2 things you can do. One is the visitor will go ahead and rescan and answer the questions the correct way. But the other thing we put in recently was the ability for the supervisor to go directly in there and just modify it from being a denied record to being actually granted, and also being able to do things like put a comment in there as to, why did they change that? Or in the case maybe if somebody's been denied access and they actually say, yes, I have potential, health risk, then sometimes our customers want to document what instructions the on-site personnel gave to that person when they left. It might be, we told them you should go get a health check, COVID test, you should go do this or that. And some of our customers have said they do want to actually document what those people are being told when they don't come on the site. And I'll show this in a few minutes when we go through a demo, but this again gets kind of back to the, having much better data quality, having a system where you can actually audit and view real time, what's going on the job site. The other thing we recently added was the ability to do a checkout. So not only do you capture when the visitor comes in, scans a QR code, for example, that comes into the job site, but you can now also record, where the visitor can actually record a checkout event. The benefit of doing this is that if you want to try to use this more for the daily log reports, where you actually want to try and capture how many hours a particular worker or the subcontractor in aggregate, how many hours they had on a day or a month or a week, then we have that information that captures that and makes it easy again to reconcile that information. Or perhaps if you're feeding another system like Procore, I think you guys actually use Raken, as I recall, that there's some things we actually do there to let you attach logs directly into Raken just as part of managing it in your daily log, correct?
Correct.
Right.
That's
yeah, go ahead.
That's the sheet where you can take all the 100+ names at the end of the day, and if you need to make changes on it, you can. We don't make very many changes, and then it's downloaded into a PDF and we upload it into Raken, which is what we use for our actual safety program.
Yeah, precisely. And speaking of safety, we've seen in the recent months a lot more interest in safety being not just COVID, but general site safety. So we've had customers ask for being able to do things like, as part of the check-in process, the first time they come into any of your locations, actually putting a video link in the check-in process where the visitor actually has to open that link, watch perhaps a training video or a safety video that they check the box that says they acknowledge that they've watched that content. We're also looking going forward to also do things like broadcast alerts. So we know who's checked into a site. We've got their contact information, an email, a phone. If something happens on a site that might be an issue, the ability for a site supervisor, safety officer, project manager to actually then broadcast to everybody on that site, hey, something is going on that you need to be aware of. We're looking at continually improving and adding these things in the software as well. What I'd like to do now is go ahead and do a brief demonstration of some of these capabilities. What I am showing you here is what an administrator of our app would see when they're managing the application. Typically within our customers' function, they'll have an administrator who will go into our system, set up a site. It's very easy to do. Literally within a few minutes, you can have a site defined and then have a QR code available for checking in visitors. So in this example here, as a supervisor, I'm signed into the app. I can see that I've got a certain number of sites that are currently active. Active meaning that the visitors can check into the site. We also have a concept of making a site inactive. And when a site is made inactive, what that means is that you and all your people would still have visibility to all of the history of all the check-ins that happened. But in this case, the visitor doesn't actually check into the site anymore. So we know over time, a lot of jobs complete, new jobs start, and we've made our licensing very flexible in order to kind of adapt to that model. If we look at this first site here, what you'll see is the QR code. And the QR code, once you set up a site, you have the ability to then download this poster as a PDF file, print it, both in Spanish and English. And if you also enable the ability to check out, there's also another code that a visitor could also use to check out. Now, as an administrator or a supervisor to actually see a site, you can then actually go in and get a real-time view of all the visitors that have come in. So for example, for today, we just have a couple of demo examples here. If you want to go back, let's say for the last 30 days, see that information, you can very quickly see who's been in the site, their time they actually entered. If you enable the checkout feature, you'll see you can not only see when they came in, but when did they actually say they left the site, and then the ability to get their contact information. So what I'm going to do is through the admin app, I'm going to do a check-in, but you can imagine if somebody had the QR code on their smartphone, they scan it. We built the app so it looks nice on a smartphone. So the typical process would be the user agrees to basically that they're going to provide accurate information. From there, the visitor enters their contact information, and you decide what contact information you want to collect. And so, for example, in this case, previously when I came in, I put my information in. The next time I come in to sign into the app, I don't need to rekey it. But let's say, for example, the person just puts, Joe in, like we were saying originally, and then they try and, check in. Well, the application is actually going to say, you can't check in until you actually give us full first name and last name, right? So this is what Sheri was talking about earlier, where a lot of visitors were just putting a first name in, made it very difficult to figure out who was actually there. The other thing is in the application for the visiting companies, so this, the example of construction would be, who are all the subcontractors that are coming in? They can either type that in, or in the case of Sheri, what she had done is she actually entered the list of subcontractors into the application. And then when a visitor comes in, they just simply start to type the name of their company in. So for example, if I'm with a window company, I start to type in and I say, okay, I'm with Window Covering Products, right? And this kind of guarantees that when we save the information on our system and you go back and do the log reporting, that you have the exact name of the company that they were with for your records. Now, some cases that, maybe you've got delivery and other people that show up into the site, you can also set up the app. So perhaps if there was a pizza delivery, they're not in the system, but if I say New York Pizza is doing a delivery, I can also add that to the application as I go along. Now, once you get through the contact information, then you have the ability to set up what other information you want to collect. In some cases, our customers are saying, I do want to know what activities they intend to perform when they're on the site. They can look through a list and check it off. You can also search if you have maybe a big list. I know that I'm going to be delivering pizza to the site, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then we take through the user through the questions. So these could be any questions you want in the form of a yes or no answer. It could be COVID related, could be anything you want to add to the application. But as I answer these questions, you'll see that this is one that I've actually customized for my business. In this case, are you well today? It could be anything you want. Let's say they answer no, right? The last part is then you want them to agree to abide by certain behaviors when they're on the site. So for example, they'll maintain their 6-foot distancing, they wear a face mask. You can also add to the app any additional things like liability waivers, other documents that you want them to actually read. So here's actually a PDF document that you want them to agree that they've read to and abide by. Then the part with actually watching the videos, right? That this is actually a video link. In this case, we've had some customers say we put together some YouTube videos. We make it very easy to just go ahead and point the app to a YouTube video, and then they basically have to open, in this case, they have to open the link before they're allowed to check in. Once they go through the process, the app is then going to tell them whether they're denied or granted access to the site. In this case, Joe actually answered one of the questions in a way that flags Joe as a potential risk, and they're told do not enter the site. Now the app is set up to then send real-time alerts to supervisors, administrators, either text or emails saying that this particular visitor has an issue. And that's typically the process then where somebody on site will want to identify that visitor and find out, what's going on. I'm going to close this here for a moment. You see then in the real-time log, I may get an alert, but I also see in the real-time log here that this visitor was denied access to the location. One of the things we put in the app now is that the supervisor can now actually go in there and say, well, you know what, they were originally denied, but they were actually granted. The reason why they're going to be granted is because they miskeyed an answer, right? So on the spot, I've said, okay, I'm actually going to tell that visitor they're granted access to the location. And then you've got an audit trail in the system. So over time, if you ever need to go back and look, it'll actually tell you for that visitor that they're originally denied, then somebody changed them to granted. Why did they change it to granted? And then who actually made that change? So I signed into the app. So you got an audit of what was changed, why it was changed, who did it, and when they did it. Pretty cool. Now, the other thing I did want to show is the actual process of checking out, something we recently introduced into the system. So when the visitor scans a QR code, they check in, and then on their device, all the check-ins that they've done over time are recorded. And because I've enabled the ability to check out, what'll happen is if you put a checkout QR code at the site, they can scan that, it'll open up the app, or they could simply just open up the app on their own, on their device, and they'll be able to see all the check-ins that they've done on this particular device. And if you've enabled the site to allow a visitor to check out, they simply go into the app and they basically say, I'm confirming that I'm checking out. And if I go back to the admin app, you now see that it's actually recorded their check-in and their checkout event as well, right? So a lot more valuable information you can capture here in terms of the log reporting. I'm going to take a quick moment and just show customizing the app. We've tried to make that as easy as possible for you to do. We have standard information that's already part of the app. And if you don't need to change it, you're good. You can get this thing up and running literally just within minutes. But maybe you don't need to ask them certain questions. It's very easy in the app to say, I don't need to ask them that question. I'm just going to make that inactive. Now, the company information, so in the case of Sheri, for example, she set it up so she's got a list in the app, basically just a cut and paste, for example, of all of the subcontractors that come into the site. So when that visitor checks in, this is the list that they're actually picking from. That part of how they're check into a site. Entry questions, pretty straightforward. Here's our standard list of questions. You can add your own. So in the case of Are You Well Today, this is a question that I added to the app. And then the same with the entry terms, right? In this case, I actually added this term that says I want them to agree that they watched the video. And here you see I've actually got my YouTube video link that I put into the app. And basically this little box says that the user must open the link, actually watch the video before they're actually allowed to check into one of your sites for the very first time. One other thing I'm going to show then related to the check-in, check-out is daily log reporting. So we've actually in the app, let me go back for a moment here, I'm sorry. I'm going to go back in the app. We do have a catalog of a lot of dashboards and reports. that show a lot of great information over time, graphs and charts, how many people were in your sites, which sites, what time of the day were they there, what day of the week, that type of information. But we've also got a few new reports that we put in recently, one that we call the Daily Log Report. And what this shows you is for all the visiting companies by day, how many visitors showed up for the day, and then if they were checking in and out, how many hours, in this case, these 3 visitors worked, from this company on this particular day. And then this is the type of information that makes it very easy to take and use to verify any daily logs you're doing in other products like Procore and Raken, and a couple of variations of the report as well. So here, I'm giving you a nice kind of a view of all the companies that were on site, in this case, particular site number. You're going to go in there, you very quickly pick your site numbers if you're managing more than one site. And then over time, in this case by day, for the past week, for example, how many hours people are on site, and then how many visitors. This one report you can also then, I was going to go bounce back and forth here, but this other report, you can then also see exactly which visitors were there and what time did they check in and what time did they check out. So just a lot of great information that would capture as part of this overall process, give you that better visibility to the site and kind of reconcile the different hours different visiting companies are doing. All right, so I think I've pretty much covered everything I wanted to show you all today.